So as I mentioned earlier, in honor of the upcoming pagan holiday of autumn equinox, sometimes called Mabon, our theme today is of hearth and home. And autumn is upon us, it's approaching. And so the reason that I picked this particular theme was just because I've been involved in being more connected to the seasons myself, although it does feel a little bit early for pumpkin spice lattes, but I don't know about you, I'm kind of rolling with it. The other reason that I thought it might be good to talk about home, and I'm not really going to be talking about the seasons this morning, is because this is a new home to me, and it's a home to all of you. And what is that? This home that some have been part of for a long while, but that we continually welcome newcomers into and make space for. So let's explore it. So home, it's kind of a loaded word. It seems pretty simple on the surface, but in some sense it is. The concept of home or hominess, if we just go with popular culture, let's say, brings up ideas of scented candles or potpourri or deep couches with just the right amount of tasteful throw pillows. Yes, or at least that's what it is for me. Or maybe the idea of home or feeling homey might bring up something more sensual, like your particular soul food, maybe pot roast or pot pie, maybe fried chicken or matzo ball soup, macaroni and cheese, homemade lasagna, your Ukrainian grandmother's borscht or your American grandmother's pumpkin pie, or if you're like me, your Southern dad's collard greens grown fresh from the garden, or maybe something like curry or saffron rice or fried tofu or garlic green beans. I'm going to stop before everybody wants to leave for lunch. Perhaps home meant something to you as a child, but doesn't mean the same thing to you anymore. And perhaps that's a good thing. Or maybe it's not. Maybe home calls to you like a clanging longing of a distant past. And maybe like Tin Man, your heart wishes to beat for a place, or like Dorothy, you long to get back there somehow, but you're not sure how to find the way. Home is a concept that wafts over radios in pop songs as we drive the highways and byways. Maybe you'll sing with me, country roads, take me home to the place I belong. Written about, oh yeah, keep going. Mama, take me home, country roads. Written about the mountains not too far from here. Or homeward bound, I wish I was homeward bound. Home, where my thoughts are. Okay, we'll do a concert next time. Home is a place that we sometimes long for, that's common in our culture, and other times we long to leave. Home isn't always a kind place. Like any popular cultural image, there's the ideal of the thing, there's the idea of the thing, there's the common narrative of the thing, and then there's the reality of the thing. And the reality of the thing is as diverse as we are. Some of us, we don't currently have homes, or we don't know where home is, or like me, we've moved so many times that maybe we feel a little bit less rooted and more like a potted plant, displaced, or more painfully displaced. The painful topic of displacement. What does home mean when one's ancestors were forcibly removed from where home once was and feels like it still should be? What does home mean when a wildfire has destroyed it? What does home mean when one's current landscape is completely new and foreign, having fled the one place that home always was, but is no longer? Home is as diverse as we are, and home, it's complicated. It seems easy at first glance to conjure up images of those pumpkin spice candles and cozy fireplaces, and these things do create a warm, relaxing feeling that we can call home, if we like those things. And I'd like for us to, in addition to thinking about place, also move into that feeling, the feeling of home, and discuss that today. What feels like home? How do we know when a person or a place or community feels like home? What is this exactly? And is it its own kind of coziness? Is it safety, a sense of familiarity? Someone just the other day, going off script for a minute, but what quoted me that within the first few minutes of entering a new congregation, people can tell whether or not they might be able to make friends. Not trying to single you all out today. And this is what encourages them to come back. And then after a couple more times, they've already decided whether or not they're going to continue because of that connection. I have my own story about that from looking at different congregations when I was living in the California Bay Area. And I chose to go to a congregation that was a further drive from my house. You know why? Because people talked to me and I felt that connection. That was something that felt like home to me, for me. The point is, the feeling of home is an experience. And if home is something that we can seek or we can create, we can learn to recreate it and lean into seeking it together, perhaps here within these walls or out in the Zoom room too. And so how do we do that? What's the feeling that we're trying to capture, and how do we do that, and how do we create home together? So in moments like this, when contemplating things like this, I often refer to current writer and researcher and storyteller of the human experience, Brené Brown. Anyone love Brené Brown like I do? Few people. So I have one of her more recent books that's kind of a collection of archives of her thinking. It's called Atlas of the Heart. I really recommend it. Great coffee table book. It's beautiful, lots of imagery. In Atlas of the Heart, Brown writes about, among other things, the concept of belonging. This, to me, is the ground of what makes a place, a person, or a community feel like home. Brown writes, any discussion of belonging has to start with acknowledging that love and belonging are irreducible needs for all people. In the absence of love and belonging, there's always suffering. In essence, Brown is underlining that we need each other to survive. This goes beyond our basic need for physical safety or our biological requirements for food and shelter for survival. We need to feel love and belonging in order to survive. And in addition to finding belonging amongst each other, it's essential that we find belonging within ourselves, that we belong to ourselves. This means that feeling at home within ourselves is the entryway into belonging, because then we show up as we truly are. And this is key, it's crucial, it's essential. Belonging, according to Brown, is the opposite of fitting in. Any belonging that asks us to betray ourselves is not true belonging. True belonging, she writes, is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging does not ever require you to change who you are. True belonging requires you to be who you are. And because we can feel belonging only if we have the courage to share our most authentic selves with people, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Perhaps one of the most iconic searches for home in our culture, lighten it up for a moment, is conveyed in the classic film, The Wizard of Oz. Probably knew I was going to go there. In it, the main character, Dorothy, is flung to a far-off land after her home is displaced by a twister, the natural disaster of a tornado that blows through her homeland of Kansas. Dorothy's house is thrown in the air by the twister and falls right down, kerplunk, into the land of Oz, right smack dab into the middle of the yellow brick road. Yes? Anybody not familiar with The Wizard of Oz here? Awesome. Since after Dorothy lands in the middle of Oz, she then begins to meet a whole host of characters, some helpful allies, others who mean to thwart her mission, and she embarks on the hero's quest, a personal journey to return home. Some of the most important characters that Dorothy meets are the Scarecrow, who yearns to have a brain, the Tin Man, who longs for a heart, and the Cowardly Lion, who would give anything for courage. And eventually, these three allies and Dorothy and her little dog Toto travel to the end of the yellow brick road, and they make it all the way to the Emerald City, where they request a visit with the Wizard of Oz, who they hope will help fulfill their quests for a brain, a heart, courage, and home. The ultimate moral of this story appears when the Wizard of Oz is exposed. Why, he's only a man behind a curtain. In fact, he's actually displaced himself, having landed in Oz when his hot air balloon fell into the city and went off course. And he never, ever had any sort of magical power to grant any of these characters any of their wishes. However, a different sort of magic happens from his belief in them. A different sort of magic is kindled by his fraud, for he tells them that they all had what they needed inside of them all along, not just Dorothy, but all of them. You see, the Tin Man always had a heart. We knew that because how else would have he had empathy from the start? He was rusting in the woods because he'd been crying. He always had a heart. And the Cowardly Lion, well, he was afraid, but of course we all know that in order to have courage, you have to be afraid of something first and then move towards your fear. He actually possessed courage all along because he had fear and he desired to face it the whole time. And the Scarecrow, in this story, the brain is not about intelligence. It's about wisdom. And he has been the mentor and the confidant and the supporter, the wise supporter of Dorothy the whole time. So he was wisely guiding her down the path with the brain all along. And then there's Dorothy, who had the power to return home this whole time, but this is where it gets a little bit more abstract because it's placed inside her shoes. She just has to click her slippers 3 times, and then she's there. This is mysterious and magically works for the storyline. It's very fulfilling. But what does this tell us about Dorothy and home? So we get a first message. Don't look outside yourself for natural answers that naturally arise within. And Dorothy found her way back home from this self-empowerment. But then she gets home and the lesson is really deeper than that. The lesson for Dorothy is about what home means to her and why she was longing for it the whole time. You see, when she gets back home, she realizes that everyone she met in Oz reminded her of someone she loves. The magical journey to Oz, we all realize, was probably just a wild dream of Dorothy's when she was knocked unconscious and fell into a deep sleep during the twister. And when she wakes up from her dream, surrounded by her family, she receives the deeper download of wisdom about the true meaning of home for herself that she's been longing for. And I'm going to share it with you in the words of Dorothy, not from the screenplay, but from a monologue from a different play. So imagine I've got on a blue gingham dress, pigtails, okay, ruby slippers, little dog, okay? Here's Dorothy's words. There comes a time when we have to learn something as children and young people, and I have just learned a very important lesson in life. You see, for all the so-called friends who say they will support you, and then when the going gets tough, fail you, there are some people who you cannot do without. Imagine finding such a friend in a cowardly lion too afraid of his own shadow, or a clanking, rusting tin man minus a heart, or a brainless scarecrow so intent on trying to be brainy. Well, that just happened for me in a way I never thought possible, but it happened. I can assure you it was so unreal, like it was part of a strange, weird dream, like someone had managed to put a dream in my head against my wishes. I was so stuck, you see, thinking I had to get home to Aunt Em and the farm, and I had to bring Toto back home. I simply had to. And the odd thing about it is, the thing that I learned the most, that I now know to be true, is that there is no place like home. There's no place like home. That's where the love is. That's where truth is. That's where family is. That is the place to be. There's no place like home. There's no place like home for Dorothy because home is where her heart is and where she connects with others' hearts. Dorothy not only belonged to her family, but her family belonged to her. She was not only accepted by her family as her authentic self, she accepted them and she drew them closer to her heart, which is the reciprocal nature of belonging and home. Yes? This is what our culture is working on right now, moving away from individuality, right? Into collective community. So this is a part of belonging that I feel like actually isn't often talked about. We know it intuitively when we think of what makes us feel at home, but it's not only about showing up authentically and receiving love from others, is it? It's not only about receiving love that brings us deep fulfillment, it's giving love. It's feeling love well up inside our own hearts. It's learning what makes someone else laugh. It's remembering your friend's favorite soup, not just yours, and bringing it over to them in a time of need. Belonging isn't an act of possession. It's a right fit, not a fitting in, but like a cozying up, like peas in a pod. Yeah? Or maybe if you're more introverted, it's like sitting on opposite ends of the couch with the cat in between. But it's a right fit. You see, Dorothy's journey wasn't an isolated hero's journey to the mountaintop. Hers was a journey of mutuality. She traveled with companions all along the way. It was never about her. It was about community. And in returning home, she landed back in the lap of love of her community. Hers was not only a story of personal empowerment and self-belief, but a story of relational connection. And every single character was vulnerable in its own way, and that vulnerability brought them closer together. They showed up authentically with their wounds. They didn't hide them, and they sought the truth together. And in relation to belonging, we can go a step further and include not only connection, but coming back together after periods of disconnection too, like being separate from her family. So I know we've covered a lot of ground here in this sermon, but I'm going to bring in one more concept before we move to discussion. Coming back together after disconnection is essential to continued belonging. Relational cultural theory, a theory I have come to know and love, is a field within psychology that developed alongside the feminist movement of the 1970s. And it was developed by a collaboration of female psychologists. And it elevates the importance of mutuality within relationships and relationships for our psychological health. The willingness to have an impact on one another, to share authentically of ourselves while staying open to each other's truths as well, to change and be changed by one another. This is called mutual empathy and exists within all growth fostering relationships when we're willing to grow together. This is a term coined by one of RCT's pioneers, Jean Baker Miller. Another collaborating founder, Judith Jordan, states that RCT sees disconnection as normative. And I know all of us here experience disconnection with others every single day. It is normal. It's normative and inevitable in relationships. It occurs when one person misunderstands, invalidates, excludes, humiliates, or injures another person in some way. And we have to accept this in order to be at home with one another. It's going to happen. It actually needs to happen for healthy community. Acute disconnections, Jordan says, occur frequently in all relationships. If they can be addressed and reworked, they're not problematic. In fact, they become places of enormous growth. So this dance between connection, disconnection, and then coming back together to repair and reconnect and try to understand one another, it's the work of belonging too. Maybe it was even part of Dorothy's work as she disconnected metaphorically, but then came back, centered in, and appreciated her elders and her family even more. It's important that we remember that this doesn't have to work perfectly. In fact, fitting in is a form of perfectionism, and perfection does not exist in the landscape of belonging. Perfectionism doesn't lend us to feel like home. It's a sneaky type of fitting in, and those fruits don't grow in the land of authenticity. So I leave you with a few questions. Where does your heart feel at home? How does your heart feel at home? When and with whom? Hold these in your heart. You don't have to answer them all publicly here, but we will discuss a little bit. When we've all done the inner work of claiming our own belonging, which happens first within ourselves, how can we show up for others with curiosity and compassion, willing to begin again in love, again and again, knowing that we will all make mistakes? I will make mistakes. Maybe I haven't made any big ones yet. But as your minister, how do we keep going? Knowing that repair is always on the other side of moments of disconnection and will actually make us stronger, understand one another more deeply, and able to build something even more beautiful together.